totality, or to be more precise, as a concrete totality, can be used for explanation and interpretation of the relation between philosophy and politics, in the sense that philosophy and politics constitute a sort of bloc storico, historical block. The method that I will try to carry out is a sort of double moving, so between Hegel and Gramsci. So from Hegel to Gramsci, in order to understand Gramsci concept of bloc storico, historical block, through the concept of totality, and in other directions. So move from Gramsci to Hegel in order to revisit the concept of totality and assess its potentials or capacities in order to address the problem of relation between philosophy and political. So the first thing to be done is to see what's the historical block of Gramsci, what's the meaning of this concept. As with many other concepts from Gramsci's, and especially key terms from Gramsci's work, and when I say Gramsci's work, I mainly mean prison notebooks, so the notebooks that he wrote between 29 and 35 in the prison. So as the many concepts, the key terms from this work, Gramsci does not offer one definition what is historical block, what is bloc story. He builds and constructs his concepts according to their placement in different contexts. So he's playing with the concepts, so to say, and that means his concepts are in constant development. So sometimes we are saying about the same concept in 29 and the same concept which means something different in 34 or something, so it must be understood this way. But nonetheless, there are some common meanings, so to say. In the first place, and this meaning remains constant through the whole work of, the whole series of prison notebooks, that historical block means dialectical relation between structure and superstructures. So the classical Marxist problem, so between material, economical reality, we can say, and political, juridical, institutional, ideological domain. And here the historical block has the aim to preclude two dangers or two excesses for Gramsci. It is the excess of economism, that is dominance of structure and material objective forces, and on the other side, excess of ideologism, you can say. So dominance of superstructures and ideological forms. So historical block has this centrist function to protect from these two dangers. The second meaning of historical block is in relation to Gramsci's definition of what is human being, something that can seem totally different from what I said before, but it is not. We'll see it after. So to the question, what is the man, Gramsci says it must be understood as a historical block. After we'll see the quote. Third meaning, actually, it's that Gramsci uses this concept as a kind of a materialistic equivalence of idealistic concept. So he's actually offering it's kind of materialistic translation of the idealistic concept, such as the spirit. So the bloc storico for him is the equivalent of the Hegelian, and actually more than Hegelian Croce, from Benedetto Croce's spirit. And the fourth meaning, but it's not so important now, it's the historical block is actually it's more among Gramscians than by Gramsci himself is used to indicate a sort of political alliance composed of different social forces. But that will be, it's an important question, but it will be not my focus. So it's first occurrence of the notion of bloc storico in the notebook 4. Gramsci rejects the thesis and a certain interpretation of Marx, according to which ideologies, that means the domain of superstructures, would be a mere illusion, mere appearance, just a kind of secondary phenomenon, expression of the material reality. So this is this vulgar interpretation. He rejects this interpretation, introduces the historical block, exactly this concept, by saying that this term is needed exactly to study the true value of superstructures, which are objective and operating reality, sono realtà oggettiva e operante. That means it's far away of being a mere phenomenal expression of material, some kind of material essence. The political ideological reality is objective. It's, I mean, Gramsci is here Hegelian, it's part of objective spirit. And this domain of superstructure has its own Wirklichkeit, own reality. In the same notebook, it's not surprisingly, Gramsci employs the concept of historical bloc in a paragraph entitled "The Passage from Knowledge to Comprehension to Feeling," and vice versa, which can seem as a merely epistemological problem of how to integrate the cognitive faculties, so knowledge, passions, but for Gramsci, the problem of knowledge-passion relation is political. It's the problem of relation between the mass, people, and intellectuals. So here the concept of the historical bloc serves to express this, his adhesion organica, so I don't know, organic adherence, I don't know, was the translation of the union between the people, mass, which have their own passions or inclinations, and intellectuals who elaborate a certain theoretical knowledge on the basis of this passion. So, popular passions, or he says also sense of community, so it's the common sense. But I will now go back to the first and the main meaning. I mean, the main meanings of the historical bloc. I need to very slides. So these are. No, I will do it. Don't worry. First. Yeah. So these are some kind of synthesis of different definitions, so to say. So historical bloc is the unity of content and the form, material forces and ideology. It's the unity between nature and spirits, unity of opposites and distincts. Then it's necessary reciprocity between structure and superstructure, concrete identity of economic, social content and ethical, political form. Then this is definition about it concerns the nature of human being. When he said, it's a quote, "Man is to be understood as a historical bloc of purely individual and subjective elements, and of mass and objective elements." So the human being is considered as again, you can say, unity of the purely individual, their subjective elements, and it's interesting that he connects here objectivity with the mass, so with the collectivity. And yeah, the necessary also, what historical is necessary and vital nexus between structure and substructure. So, so we see here that the prevailing meaning of historical bloc is that of the dialectical unity of structure and superstructures. But I would like to use this same concept, following some indications in Gramsci, in order to explain relation within the sphere of superstructures. So, more specifically, relation between philosophy and politics. So, not historical bloc as and only as the relation between basis, structure, and superstructure, but as the relation inside, within the domain of superstructures, and as I said, philosophy, mainly philosophy, politics, as two forms of superstructure. But before addressing this problem, I'd like to to turn back to my first claim at the beginning, and to say something about why the concept of historical bloc is rather to be articulated as a category of totality, instead of some other concept that Gramsci uses here, such as unity, reciprocity, nexus, and concrete identity, and so on. So here, of course, you need to go beyond Gramsci's letter and to step back toward this Hegelian setting of the question, since Gramsci is not making speculative conceptual distinction between unity, totality, but he's, let's say, practicing this distinction. So it is exactly the point where we need Hegelian upgrade, so to say, Hegelian complement. So, as you might note, category of totality is one of the most disputed in Hegel, together with the category of absolute, and it is usually identified with the supreme result of the alleged reconciliating dialectics. No, and But the rejection of totality is often part of certain political strategy. And the most famous example is Karl Popper. And he's superficial, but maybe it's the most generous thing that I can say about his interpretation. So Karl Popper's identification between totality and totalitarianism. So for him, the emancipation from the category of totality has a clear anti-totalitarian function. But also we have others, so to say, more Hegel-friendly rejections of totality. We heard this morning about Adorno, he's also one example, who wants to save the negativity of dialectic exactly from the Hegelian type of totality. There's also Levinas with his totality and the infinite. So there are different forms of rejection, let's say less or more Hegel-friendly of totality. But to describe generally this negative attitude toward totality, I will use one quote from Althusser, who proposed to abandon Hegelian totality in order to keep the category of the whole in Marx. And he's saying, because within the totality, a double temptation is always present, that of considering it as a pervasive essence, which exhaustively embraces all of its manifestations, and what comes with the same thing, that of discovering in it, as in a circle or a sphere, a metaphor which makes us think of Hegel once again, a center which would be its essence. So it's a classical critique of essentialism, of totality as an essentialist concept. As I said, in the background is this distinction between totality and the whole, which is important, I would say, but he totally misses the point with his suggestion to substitute the totality with the whole, because it's Hegel's logic that allows for a speculative distinction between the concept of the whole, concept of the whole, das Ganze or Ganzheit, and that of totality, where totality is conceived as a circle, as a sphere, precisely with the idea to avoid the dangers of abstract notion of the whole. So in other words, it is exactly the concept of totality that provides the concreteness and the openness that Althusser looks for, but is not able to see it in Hegel. So my point here would be to stick to this basic conceptual distinction between totality and the whole, where the whole is defined as the composition of elements, its parts, which are still relatively autonomous with respect to the whole. So the relation between the whole and the parts is, as Hegel is saying in the Science of Logic, immediate, external, and mechanical, äußerlich und mechanisch. So the totality, on the other hand, does not have parts in the strict sense, but moments, where each moment is posited as the moment of the other. So the totality category of totality is rather about the internal structure of its moments and their intrinsic interrelatedness. I have some quotes from Encyclopedia, from Hegel. The parts are diverse from one another and are what is self-standing, but they are only parts in their identical relation to one another, or insofar as taken together that they make up the whole. The next quote, which is actually more complicated, but I don't have time for analyzing, where the concept of the whole is more in proximity. I mean, yeah, it's better to read it so it will be more clear. The whole thus consists of the parts, and apart from them, it is not anything. It is therefore the whole relation and the self-subsistent totality, but for precisely this reason, it is only a relative. For what makes it a totality is rather its other, the parts. It does not have its subsistence within it, but in its other. So it seems that Hegel here is proposing the conception of the whole as bad totality, so to say. So it's a little bit different, but let's say we don't need now so detailed distinctions. What is important to make a sort of conclusion that the true totality that is not simply the whole, is not that totality cancels the otherness. It is exactly, in the totality, this otherness itself is defined also as totality. So the relation of totality, if we consider it, and we must in theory, science of logic, and there's a relational concept. So the relation of totality is actually a relation with the other totalities as its moment. So it includes a relation with otherness as a relation that determines also this otherness as totality. So what before were just the composing elements of the whole, now are the moments of totality as totalities. So now it would be interesting to see how this is connected with the concept of contradiction and so on, but this would be the definition of totality that I will like to draw from Hegel. And now a small digression. Let's speak 1 hour. Maybe it's time.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Oh, okay.
No, sir. Okay, if you, I mean,
Okay.
it depends on how much hungry you are.
So my impression was
So maybe 10 and we have a short.
okay, so I wanted to make a small digression about Karol Kosik, who's an almost forgotten philosopher in Europe. I don't know whether he's studied here in America. He wrote this very influential book in '63 about dialectics of the concrete, where he developed the concept of concrete totality. But okay, if it's only 3 minutes, I will skip it. I just want to mention it. So the main question would be, is it allowed to understand the domain of superstructure that we saw before as Hegelian totality, in the sense that its moment, so philosophy and politics, constitute a historical bloc. So it is interesting that Gramsci uses the adjective total to describe both politics and what he calls philosophy of praxis, which is for him simply the name for Marxism. He says that philosophy of praxis is philosophia totale, so total philosophy, total conception of the world. And politics is also defined in similar terms when he speaks about autonomy of political fact as a sort of total political fact. And we can find some ambiguous claims, for example, when he's saying that art, moral, and philosophy can be reduced to being a moment of politics and not vice versa. So he's saying here something different than I wanted to claim from the beginning. But yeah, there are certain ambiguities, of course. But in any case, I think it would be misleading to understand this as a mere reductionism. So I would propose a Hegelian reading of Gramsci here, that is the reading through the concept of totality. And if totality, as I said before, is defined through a relation to otherness, to an initially excluded otherness that reveals to be constituted as totality as well, this means that we can treat both philosophy and politics as totalities determined through its own otherness. That means totality of philosophy, now I'm coming back to the ambiguity from my title, totality of philosophy that is constituted through its relation to politics. And politics as totality which is determined through its relation to philosophy. Here there is one quote from Gramsci, very interesting, but he's saying, philosophy must become politics in order to realize itself, in order to go on being philosophy. That tranquil theory must be put into practical effect, must become the form of actuality, and so on and so on. There are many references in the background, Marx, thesis on Feuerbach, also Hegel's philosophy of history, but doesn't matter now. So what is Gramsci saying here is not simply that we have to get rid of philosophy, which will be totally anti-philosophical and replace it with politics. He's saying that philosophy must become politics in order to continue to be philosophy. And it complies, this logic complies totally with the logic of Aufhebung. So the philosophy negates itself in politics, but in doing so, it not only affirms itself as philosophy, but it develops itself. It continues to live as philosophy, so that philosophy survives as politics in its political form. Now we can make a lot of questions. So what kind of philosophy? Does it, for all types of philosophy, what does it mean that, so what's the definition of philosophy here, and so on and so on. Now I will finish soon.
Yeah, I mean, we all agree that.
Okay, but if the notion of historical bloc does not imply simply a unity of different moments, but as I wanted to stress before, but their mutual determination transformation, then it should be not only philosophy that becomes politics in order to remain philosophy, But also politics must somehow become philosophical or philosophy in order to continue to be politics. And on this aspect, actually, Gramsci's position is less elaborated, and it seems sometimes that he downplays this moment, he humiliates it. But if we consider it in his whole work and the whole development of his work and his methodology, then actually it's critical. Gramsci's theoretical aspect is an the immanent, integral part of political action. So yes, historical bloc has this understood as totality, has this function. So philosophy and politics are both defined through its excluded otherness, which is then attempted to be included in order to transform both philosophy and politics. So it's a concept that transforms both philosophy and politics. And in this way, both philosophy and politics develop itself in terms of their concreteness. And it should be also clear now why the domain of superstructure is not the whole composed of the parts. It is totality where each its moment is defined and transformed through mediation of other its moments. Actually, Gramsci treats this problem in notebooks under section entitled Translatability of Scientific and Philosophical Languages. I don't have time now to elaborate on this, but he claims a reciprocal translatability between the language of German idealism and the language of French revolutionary practice. And he poses the problem of translatability between philosophy and politics in a concrete certain historical moment, such as the context during and immediately after the French Revolution. And actually, the question of translatability is one of the fundamental in Gramsci's philosophy of praxis. It doesn't say simply that at certain historical moment there is a correspondence between different discourses in their single elements, such as correspondence between some particular political idea and some philosophical concept. What he wants to say with this discourse on translatability that these discourses, languages as such, are constitutively related to other languages. And this is exactly the meaning of historical bloc I want to highlight. This idea, this concept of translatability actually works on different levels. And since also what I want to try here is, by going Hegel and Gramsci, is to articulate a certain translatability between them, in the sense to translate the concept of historical bloc into the category of concrete totality and vice versa, in order to show not only correspondences between different positions, but also to indicate a possible interpretation of the relation between philosophy and politics, and to reactualize actually this concept of historical bloc, which among Gramscians, which is interesting, is a little bit forgotten. So the idea was to maybe to make it more speculative and to leave it to the Hegelians. I'm sorry if I spoke.
Thank you, Saša. 10 minutes for discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Saša. I hope that I have 2 hours to listen to you because you put out a lot of really interesting stuff, and I'm interested in the thing that you say that was the less interesting in your talk. There was the first way of talking about the historical bloc, that is the political alliance. Because if we have this Hegelian, Gramscian way of seeing the historical bloc as this, you talk about mutual determination and transformation, moments that became totalities, that where otherness is not concerned. I would like to know how this reveals itself in the political alliance, because it seems to me that it's a really interesting and even a really well-functioning way to talk about political alliance, if it's what I've understood from your definition of Gramsci that I totally don't know. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is important question. It wasn't just, how to say, but as I said, this idea of political alliances, historical bloc is more treated among Gramscians than, because Gramsci has other hegemony. I mean, political alliance actually it's the concept of hegemony. for Gramsci, it was the main forces of he's actually total linguist in this sense. Mere political alliances, those between working class and peasants. So different social forces that compose compose a certain, you can say, historical bloc at the moment. And it also has to do something with translatability of language, because all Gramsci's work was how to translate different languages of different subaltern groups and create a kind of historical bloc, ideological bloc that can bring universal social change. So yeah, what would be this political alliance now? Yeah, it's a complicated question. Yes, but the method is that one. I mean, it's also, I think that's why it's so highly actual now. The idea of translatability of different social languages inside a common political problem. Yeah, that can be between feminism and other forms of. So yes, yeah.
We have on the lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Saša. Thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask you if there is a relation between the notion of historical bloc and the notion of organic in Gramsci. When you talk about, for example, organic pre-crisis, it seems to talk about a crisis of the historical bloc in this sense. So,
He's actually, sometimes he's using organic as a synonym of historical.
Okay.
That's very interesting also for the kind of the vital metaphors. He's for example, using the metaphor of mummification when he's speaking about the social forces that are dying or not active. And organic is this is also interesting to see from a Hegelian point of view. It's a kind of living totality. So organic is the synonym of the historical unity of that's true.
Any other questions?
I would like to ask you a bit more about the difference between true totality and bad totality. Bad totality will entail the classical difference between the whole and the parts, and true totality will entail that the parts will not be the essence of the whole, but just other totalities. That was something that you mentioned. That the essence of the totality is another totality.
That would be true totality.
Yeah. So am I getting right the difference between true and bad totality?
Yeah, I mean the bad totality I took from Karl Kosik that I didn't
okay.
skip it. So actually he has the concept of false totality, which has three forms. Like it has this empty totality, abstract totality, and the bad totality, which is actually his version of bad infinity or something.
Yeah, bad infinity.
Maybe that part actually I was very quick. I was trying to do some kind of logical reasoning to justify the concept of totality. But similar it's with the concept of universality. I think that's why I think both concepts imply certain pluralizations. Of the concept. So totality is a concept that. I understand it as a concept that necessarily must be in relation with other totalities.
Yeah.
It's not only the part of the one totality that incorporates the plurality of the parts, but the very totality is has this immanent dynamics of being pluralized. So that's how
Yeah.
Very last
Thank you.
question.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about translation as a class of philosophy, which is, of course, you can translate it to different languages and philosophy that has become political. But Hegel as well has talked about translating different languages of thinking, intuition, representation, into concept. So I was wondering.
that's connected with that. Can be connected with that one meaning of the historical bloc at the beginning when I said it's Gramsci mentions it in the context of question of relation between knowledge and passions, which is actually also the question of the translatability between the language of we call it common sense, so spontaneous language of the people, and intellectuals. So that's what I said. It's not only an epistemological problem. So let's kind of übersetzen from representation to the concept. In Gramscian sense, it would be translation from the spontaneous passions or inclinations, feelings, sentiments of the subalterns of the people into kind of coherent philosophical knowledge about the concerns of course the social condition of the subalterns. So yeah, that's but it's I mean the question transferability that I was working on it in the last years. It's very interesting Gramsci actually, and it's also if we connected it. I mean he speaks about translatability in the same years almost when Walter Benjamin speaks about translatability. They don't know for each other at that time, so it was in the 20s, so or maybe they know it, there is no exchange, so to say. So it's very interesting that this question of translatability as political.
I was wondering if you can also Hegel has it's not just logical.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But more and more on epistemological level, yeah. Of course. I mean, this for this political, I don't know, this kind of political translation. Actually, I don't see. That's the, yeah. So that's the complementarity of languages between these two.
Thanks to both speakers.